Michelle Harlow never expected to be pregnant. Not at 35, and certainly not after what the doctors had told her a decade ago. She stared at the fourth positive pregnancy test with trembling hands, still unable to believe the results. The impossible had happened. After years of accepting that she would never bear children, Michelle was going to become a mother. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just as her life seemed perfectly structured, with her music teaching career, her marriage to Wesley, and their recent discussions about possibly adopting, her body had decided to defy medical certainty. "Wesley!" she called out, her voice catching in her throat. The spacious Connecticut apartment they'd purchased last year remained silent. Of course, he was on another business trip. Her husband's frequent absences had become more common over the past year, ever since he'd been promoted at Blake Enterprises. Michelle understood ambition. She had once been consumed by it herself when she played violin professionally, but lately something felt different about his trips. Small inconsistencies, unexplained expenses, the scent of unfamiliar perfume that sometimes lingered on his shirts when he returned. She pushed those thoughts aside. This news would change everything. Michelle placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, wondering how he would react. They'd settled into the reality of childlessness years ago, after the doctors confirmed that her botched abortion at 19 had left permanent damage. The abortion she'd gotten after discovering her older orchestra conductor wouldn't actually leave his wife for her, despite his promises. Wesley had accepted her past and her presumed infertility. He'd never expressed strong feelings about having children, always saying they were enough for each other. The next morning, Michelle awoke with a wave of nausea so intense she barely made it to the bathroom. After emptying her stomach, she sat on the cool tile floor, her back against the bathtub. This was real. She was actually pregnant. As a music teacher, she couldn't simply call in sick whenever morning sickness struck. Her students were counting on her, especially with the district-wide music competition only 3 months away. She would have to find a way to manage. By Friday, Wesley still hadn't returned from his trip, and Michelle decided to visit her doctor rather than wait. Dr. Elaine Patterson, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes, had been Michelle's physician for years. When Michelle explained her suspicions, Dr. Patterson ordered blood tests immediately. "I don't understand how this could happen," Michelle said, as Dr. Patterson examined her. "You told me after the last ultrasound that pregnancy was virtually impossible." "Medicine isn't an exact science, Michelle," Dr. Patterson replied, her experienced hands gentle as she pressed on Michelle's abdomen. "What we call medical impossibilities sometimes turn out to be medical rarities. I've seen it before." After confirming the pregnancy, Dr. Patterson referred Michelle to an obstetrician. "You'll need specialized care. Given your history and age, this would be considered a high-risk pregnancy." Michelle nodded, still processing the news. "Is the baby likely to be okay?" "Let's take this one step at a time," Dr. Patterson said, placing a reassuring hand on Michelle's shoulder. "Right now, everything seems normal. Your hormone levels are good, but I won't sugarcoat this. You'll need to be monitored carefully." On her way home, Michelle tried calling Wesley again. Voicemail. She left a message, asking him to call her back as soon as possible. They needed to talk. As she navigated through Friday afternoon traffic, Michelle noticed she'd missed a call from the school. Lily Bennett, one of her most talented students, had forgotten her music folder after choir practice. Michelle decided to drop it off on her way home. The Bennetts lived only a few blocks from her apartment complex. When she arrived at the modest 2-story house, a tall man with kind eyes and broad shoulders answered the door. Daniel Bennett, Lily's father. Michelle had met him briefly at parent-teacher conferences, but they'd never really spoken at length. "Ms. Harlow," he said with a surprised smile. "Lily mentioned she left her folder at school, but you didn't need to bring it by personally." "It's no trouble," Michelle replied. "And please, call me Michelle. We're not in school now." Daniel invited her in for coffee, but the thought of its aroma made her stomach turn. She politely declined and explained she was feeling under the weather. "Tea, then?" he offered. "My late wife always said peppermint tea works wonders for an upset stomach." Something in the way he mentioned his wife, with love and lingering grief, touched Michelle. She found herself accepting his offer. While Daniel prepared the tea, Lily appeared, her face lighting up when she saw Michelle. "Ms. Harlow, Dad. Ms. Harlow is the one who picked me for the solo part." "I know, sweetheart," Daniel said, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "You've told me about 20 times." Michelle couldn't help but notice the obvious bond between father and daughter. Daniel was clearly devoted to Lily, despite the demands of his job as a police detective. As they chatted over tea, Michelle learned more about their story, how Daniel had been raising Lily alone since his wife abandoned them 5 years ago, how he'd recently transferred to a less dangerous position to be more available for his daughter. "Anyway," Daniel said, noticing the time, "I've kept you too long with our family drama." "Not at all," Michelle said, surprised to find she'd been there for nearly an hour. "It was nice talking to an adult for a change. Most of my conversations revolve around quarter notes and proper breathing techniques." Daniel laughed, and Michelle was struck by how genuine it sounded. When was the last time she'd heard Wesley laugh like that? By the time Michelle arrived home, it was dark. She entered their empty apartment, the silence greeting her like an old friend. She sat on the couch in the darkness for a long moment, her hand resting on her abdomen. The reality of her pregnancy was still sinking in, along with the unsettling feeling that her marriage might not be as solid as she'd believed. When her phone rang, Michelle jumped, hoping it was Wesley. Instead, it was the obstetrician's office, confirming her first appointment for Monday morning. She would be having an ultrasound at 20 weeks to check on the baby's development and possibly determine its gender. Michelle realized she would need to tell Wesley before then. This wasn't news she could share over the phone. On Saturday evening, Wesley finally returned. He looked tired, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled from travel. Michelle had prepared his favorite meal, hoping to create the right atmosphere for her announcement. "Something smells amazing," Wesley said, kissing her cheek before loosening his tie. "I'm starving." The food on the plane was inedible. Throughout dinner, Michelle tried to find the right moment to share her news, but Wesley dominated the conversation with tales of his business meetings, his new projects, and how impressed Victor Blake had been with his proposals. Michelle nodded and smiled at the appropriate moments, but her mind was elsewhere. Finally, as Wesley finished his wine, Michelle took a deep breath. "Wes, I have something important to tell you." He looked up, his attention finally fully on her. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." Wesley's expression froze. He set down his glass with deliberate care. That's impossible. The doctors said." "I know what they said," Michelle interrupted gently. "But I've taken multiple tests, and I've seen Dr. Patterson. I'm definitely pregnant." Wesley stood abruptly, pacing the dining room. "How far along?" "About 12 weeks, they think. I have an ultrasound scheduled for Monday." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Michelle recognized as a sign of distress. "This is unexpected." Michelle had imagined many possible reactions from Wesley: joy, shock, concern, but his response felt oddly calculated, as if he were assessing a business risk rather than receiving life-changing news. Are you happy about it?" she asked cautiously. Wesley paused his pacing, then came to her side, taking her hands in his. "Of course," he said, his expression softening. "It's just a shock. We had accepted that children weren't in our future." "I know," Michelle said. "I'm still processing it myself." Wesley pulled her into an embrace, but Michelle couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His body felt tense against hers, his enthusiasm forced. Later that night, as Wesley slept beside her, Michelle lay awake, her mind racing. She should be elated. The miracle she'd stopped hoping for had happened. But instead of joy, she felt a growing unease. Wesley's reaction, while not outright negative, lacked the warmth she'd expected. And then there were those business trips, growing more frequent by the month. Michelle turned on her side, watching her husband's sleeping profile in the dim light. After 10 years of marriage, she thought she knew him completely. Now, she wasn't so sure. As her hand rested protectively over her growing child, Michelle made a silent promise. No matter what happened with Wesley, she would protect this unexpected gift with everything she had. Monday arrived, and Michelle prepared for her ultrasound appointment. Wesley had promised to join her but called that morning with apologies. An emergency meeting with Victor Blake couldn't be rescheduled. Michelle tried to hide her disappointment as she assured him it was fine. She would go alone. The waiting room at the Women's Health Center was crowded that morning. Michelle found a seat between a young couple whispering excitedly to each other, and an elderly woman accompanying her visibly pregnant daughter. All around her, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and joy. Michelle felt oddly disconnected from it all, sitting there alone with her secret miracle. The waiting area fell silent as a woman stumbled through the entrance. Michelle looked up from the pregnancy magazine she'd been absently flipping through and immediately noticed the newcomer's distress. Despite her designer clothes and expertly highlighted hair, the woman appeared drained, with dark circles under her eyes and a complexion so pale it bordered on gray. She was visibly pregnant, perhaps around the same stage as Michelle herself. The receptionist approached her with concern. "Ms. Blake, are you all right?" "I'm fine," the woman replied, her voice barely audible. "Just tired." As the woman, Ms. Blake, looked around for a seat, Michelle noticed there were none available. Without hesitation, she stood up. "You can take my spot," Michelle offered. "I can stand for a while." The woman looked up, gratitude flashing across her features. "Thank you," she murmured, lowering herself carefully onto the chair Michelle had vacated. Michelle smiled in response and moved toward the magazine rack near the wall. As she reached for another publication, she noticed Ms. Blake pulling something from her designer handbag. A photograph, slightly worn around the edges as if frequently handled. The woman stared at it with an intensity that seemed almost desperate, before pressing it briefly to her lips. It was a curious, intimate gesture that made Michelle feel like an intruder for witnessing it. She averted her eyes, but not before catching a glimpse of the photograph's subject. Her heart skipped a beat. Though she only saw it for a split second, the profile in that photo was unmistakable. Dark hair, strong jawline, the distinctive angle of his nose. It was Wesley. Her Wesley. Michelle froze, the magazine forgotten in her hand. She must be mistaken. It couldn't possibly be him. Perhaps the man in the photo just resembled her husband. But deep down, she knew better. "Camilla Blake," a nurse called from the doorway. The woman, Camilla, carefully returned the photograph to her purse and stood with visible effort. As she followed the nurse through the door, Michelle remained rooted to the spot, her mind racing. Blake. The name echoed in her thoughts. Blake Enterprises. Victor Blake. Wesley's boss. And now, apparently, Camilla Blake, who carried a photo of Wesley in her purse and kissed it when she thought no one was looking. Michelle Harlow? Another nurse appeared, clipboard in hand. Michelle startled and followed the nurse mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. As she lay on the examination table, waiting for the obstetrician to arrive, Michelle tried to rationalize what she'd seen. Perhaps Wesley was a mentor to Camilla. Perhaps she admired him professionally. Perhaps the cold gel on her abdomen interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "This might be a little uncomfortable," the technician said, pressing the ultrasound wand against Michelle's skin. The rhythmic whooshing sound of her baby's heartbeat filled the room, momentarily driving all other concerns from Michelle's mind. On the screen, a small figure moved, already recognizably human. "Everything looks perfect," the technician said, pointing to various features. "Strong heartbeat, good development. Would you like to know the sex?" Michelle nodded, suddenly overcome with emotion. "It's a boy," the technician announced with a smile. Congratulations! A son. Michelle was having a son. The joy of this revelation temporarily eclipsed her earlier discovery. But as she left the examination room with her ultrasound images tucked safely in her purse, the weight of what she'd witnessed in the waiting room settled back onto her shoulders. In the hallway, Michelle paused, uncertain what to do next. Part of her wanted to find Camilla, to confront her, to demand answers. But what would she say? "Excuse me, but why do you carry a photo of my husband?" The absurdity of the situation struck her. Instead, Michelle decided to leave. She needed time to think, to process. As she exited the building, Michelle nearly collided with someone on the steps. "I'm so sorry," she began, then recognized him. "Daniel?" Daniel Bennett looked equally surprised. "Michelle? What are you doing here?" She hesitated, then held up the envelope containing her ultrasound. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words still strange on her tongue. Daniel's expression shifted to one of genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations." "Thank you," Michelle replied, feeling oddly relieved to share this news with someone who seemed genuinely happy for her. "What about you? Why are you here?" "Just finished giving a statement," Daniel explained, nodding toward the police car parked nearby. "There was an incident at the pharmacy next door. Nothing serious, but procedure is procedure." They walked together to the parking lot, and Michelle found herself enjoying the simple normality of their conversation after the emotional whirlwind of her morning. "How's Lily doing with her solo?" Michelle asked as they reached her car. "Practicing constantly," Daniel said with a laugh. "The bathroom has amazing acoustics, apparently. At least, that's where she does most of her singing." Michelle smiled, imagining the enthusiastic 10-year-old belting out notes in the shower. "She's really talented, you know. She could go far with proper training." "That's actually something I wanted to discuss with you," Daniel said, his expression turning more serious. "Would you have time for coffee sometime this week? To talk about options for Lily?" Under normal circumstances, Michelle would have suggested they talk right then. But her mind was still reeling from the morning's discoveries, and she needed space to think. "How about Wednesday after school?" she suggested. "Perfect," Daniel agreed. "There's a cafe near the school, the Bluebird." Michelle nodded, said goodbye, and got into her car. As she started the engine, her phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. How did the appointment go? She stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Should she confront him? Demand to know his relationship with Camilla Blake? No, not via text. This conversation needed to happen face to face. "Everything's fine," she typed back. "It's a boy." His response came quickly. "A son. Wow. We'll talk tonight." Michelle drove home in a daze, her mind alternating between joy over her baby and dread about what was happening with Wesley. By the time she arrived at their apartment, she had made a decision. She wouldn't confront Wesley immediately. First, she needed more information. She spent the afternoon online, searching for Camilla Blake. It wasn't difficult to find her. As the daughter of Victor Blake, CEO of Blake Enterprises, Camilla appeared in numerous society photos and charity event listings. In most images, she appeared confident and polished, nothing like the pale, exhausted woman Michelle had seen that morning. One article mentioned that Camilla had recently taken over several responsibilities at Blake Enterprises while her father recovered from health issues. Another photo showed her at a company gala 6 months earlier, standing next to Wesley. They weren't touching, nothing inappropriate, but something in their posture. The way they angled toward each other sent a chill down Michelle's spine. When Wesley arrived home that evening, Michelle had composed herself. She greeted him with a smile and showed him the ultrasound images. "Our son," she said, watching his reaction carefully. Wesley studied the images, his expression unreadable. "Amazing," he said finally. "I still can't believe it." "Neither can I," Michelle replied, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. "The doctor says everything looks normal, despite the higher risks due to my age and history." Wesley nodded, returning the images to her. "That's good news." Throughout dinner, Michelle waited for Wesley to ask more questions about the baby, about the appointment, but he seemed distracted, checking his phone frequently. Finally, she decided to test him. "I saw Camilla Blake at the doctor's office today," she said casually, watching him closely. Wesley's hand froze halfway to his water glass. "Oh?" he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Victor's daughter?" "Yes," Michelle continued. "She didn't look well. Is she ill?" Wesley shrugged, but Michelle caught the tension in his shoulders. "I wouldn't know. I don't work directly with her." The lie hung between them, as tangible as a third person at the table. Michelle nodded slowly, her suspicions hardening into certainty. "I see." Later that night, as Wesley showered, Michelle checked his phone. She'd never done this before, had always respected his privacy, but now she needed to know. Most of his text messages were work-related, nothing suspicious. His emails revealed nothing incriminating. But then she found a separate messaging app, hidden in a folder labeled Utilities. And there they were, dozens of messages between Wesley and Camilla, dating back nearly a year. Michelle read enough to confirm her worst fears before returning the phone exactly as she'd found it. Wesley was having an affair with Camilla Blake, and from the content of their messages, it appeared that Camilla was also pregnant, with Wesley's child. The betrayal cut deeper than Michelle could have imagined. All those business trips, the late nights at the office, lies. How could she have been so blind? The signs had been there all along, but she'd chosen to ignore them, to trust Wesley implicitly. Now she was pregnant with his child, while his mistress carried another. On Wednesday afternoon, Michelle met Daniel at the Bluebird Cafe as planned. Despite her personal turmoil, she'd maintained her professional composure at school, focusing on her students and their music. But as she sat across from Daniel, discussing potential scholarships and music programs for Lily, Michelle found herself fighting back tears. "Michelle?" Daniel's voice was gentle. "Is everything all right?" She blinked rapidly, embarrassed by her emotional display. "I'm fine. Just pregnancy hormones, I think." Daniel didn't press, but his concerned expression told her he wasn't convinced. After they'd finished discussing Lily's musical future, he insisted on walking Michelle to her car. "Thank you for doing this," he said as they walked, "for seeing Lily's potential and helping her develop it. My wife was musical, too. She would have been so proud to see Lily perform." "Your wife?" Michelle hesitated. "What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Addiction happened. She left us 5 years ago. Came back a few times, promises to get clean, then disappeared again. Last I heard, she was living with some new boyfriend in Nevada." "I'm sorry," Michelle said, touched by his openness. "Don't be," Daniel replied. "Lily and I are doing fine." He paused, then added hesitantly, "But if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm a pretty good listener." For a moment, Michelle was tempted to unburden herself, to tell this kind man about Wesley's betrayal, about the identical pregnancies, about her uncertainty regarding her marriage and future. But she held back. Her problems were her own to solve. "Thank you," she said instead. "I appreciate that." As she drove home, Michelle made a decision. She would confront Wesley tonight. No more pretending, no more denial. Whatever happened next, she needed the truth. But when she arrived home, Wesley wasn't there. Instead, she found a note on the kitchen counter. "Emergency at work. Don't wait up. W." Michelle crumpled the note in her fist. Another lie. She wondered if he was with Camilla now, planning their future together, discussing the child they would have. The thought made her physically ill. She spent the evening researching divorce attorneys, reading about prenatal care for high-risk pregnancies, and trying to imagine a life as a single mother. Around midnight, exhausted both physically and emotionally, Michelle finally fell asleep on the couch, the television murmuring in the background. A noise woke her, the front door opening. Wesley entered, clearly surprised to find her on the couch. "You're still up," he said, loosening his tie. "I told you not to wait." Michelle sat up slowly, gathering her courage. "We need to talk, Wesley." Something in her tone made him pause. He studied her face for a moment, then sighed. "Can't it wait until morning?" "I'm exhausted." "No," Michelle said firmly. "It can't wait. I know about Camilla Blake." Wesley went completely still, his expression shuddering. "What about her?" "I know she's pregnant," Michelle continued, her voice surprisingly steady. "With your child, just like I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Wesley's face cycled through several emotions: shock, denial, calculation, and finally, resignation. "How did you find out?" he asked quietly. "Does it matter?" Michelle countered, rising from the couch. "Is it true?" Wesley ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of distress. "It's complicated, Michelle." "Is it true?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. He nodded once, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes." Michelle felt a strange calm settle over her as Wesley's admission hung in the air between them. She'd known it was true before she asked, but hearing him confirm it solidified something inside her. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real. "How long?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. Wesley sank into the armchair across from her, suddenly looking much older than his 38 years. Almost a year, nearly a quarter of their marriage. Michelle absorbed this blow in silence, calculating. His affair had begun well before either pregnancy. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a double life. And the child? You're certain it's yours? The question felt surreal leaving her lips, as if she were a character in someone else's drama. Wesley nodded. "She's due around the same time as you." Michelle closed her eyes briefly. Both children would be born within weeks of each other. Half-siblings who would either never know each other or be forced to navigate the complicated reality their father had created. "What were you planning to do?" she asked. "Just keep living this lie indefinitely? Maintain two families? Or were you planning to leave me once you found out about her pregnancy?" Wesley leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I never wanted to hurt you, Michelle." "That's not an answer," she said sharply. He sighed heavily. "I don't know. When Camilla told me she was pregnant, I was shocked. We'd been careful. And then, incredibly, you told me you were pregnant too. After being told for years it was impossible." His eyes narrowed slightly. The timing seemed suspicious. "Suspicious?" Michelle repeated, incredulous. "You think I somehow planned this? That I lied about being infertile for 10 years, just waiting for the perfect moment to trap you?" "I didn't say that," Wesley backpedaled. "But you have to admit, it's an extraordinary coincidence. A coincidence I knew nothing about until I saw your mistress today," Michelle countered. "I didn't even know she existed until I saw her kissing your photograph." Wesley winced at this detail. "It's complicated, Michelle. Victor has been grooming me to take over more responsibilities at Blake Enterprises. When his health started failing, I became his right hand. Camilla and I worked closely together. One thing led to another." "Spare me the details," Michelle interrupted. "I'm not interested in how you justified betraying our marriage vows." Wesley stood suddenly, pacing the living room. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I am. That I made a terrible mistake? I did. But this situation is beyond anything I could have anticipated. And now there are two innocent children involved," Michelle said, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. "Our son and hers, a daughter." Wesley said quietly, "Camilla is having a girl." The specificity of this detail, that Wesley knew the gender of his other child, twisted the knife deeper. Wesley had missed Michelle's ultrasound due to an emergency meeting, yet he somehow knew Camilla was having a daughter. "I want you to leave," Michelle said, the decision crystallizing in her mind. "Tonight." Wesley stopped pacing. "Michelle, be reasonable. We need to discuss this rationally." "I am being rational," she replied. "I can't share space with you right now. I need time to think, to decide what happens next. And I can't do that with you here." "This is my home too," Wesley protested, his composure cracking for the first time. "You can't just kick me out." "Actually, I can," Michelle said, rising to her full height. "Unless you'd prefer I call Daniel Bennett and explain why I need police assistance removing my adulterous husband from the premises?" The mention of Daniel's name seemed to surprise Wesley. "The cop? What does he have to do with any of this?" "Nothing," Michelle said. "He's just a concerned friend. And Lily's father." Wesley studied her face for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine. I'll go to a hotel tonight. But this conversation isn't over." "No," Michelle agreed. "It's just beginning." After Wesley packed a bag and left, the apartment felt both emptier and somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Michelle made herself a cup of peppermint tea, remembering, with an odd pang, that Daniel had recommended it for nausea, and sat by the window, watching the city lights. What would she do now? Divorce seemed inevitable, but the path forward was murky. How would she manage financially? Her teacher's salary was modest, and while they'd built a comfortable life together, much of their security came from Wesley's income. And then there was the baby to consider. Her son would need stability, security, love. Could she provide all that alone? The next morning, Michelle called in sick to school for the first time in years. She needed a day to recalibrate, to make plans. She contacted a divorce attorney and scheduled a consultation for the following afternoon. She researched her health insurance coverage, relieved to discover her prenatal care would be covered regardless of her marital status. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "We need to talk. Dinner tonight? I'll come by around 7. Michelle stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Fine." She spent the afternoon walking through a nearby park, the crisp autumn air clearing her head. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. Soon she would be a single mother. The thought was terrifying and empowering in equal measure. As she rounded a bend in the path, Michelle spotted a familiar figure on a bench ahead. An elderly man in a worn jacket, feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. Something about his dignified posture, despite his obviously humble circumstances, caught her attention. As she drew closer, the man looked up and smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it, young lady?" he called out. Michelle nodded, returning his smile. "It is. Would you like to join me?" He gestured to the empty space beside him. "The birds are good company, but they're not much for conversation." Under normal circumstances, Michelle might have politely declined and continued walking, but something about the old man's kind eyes and gentle demeanor made her pause. She sat down beside him. "I'm George," he offered. "George Winters." "Michelle Harlow," she replied. "You seem troubled, if you don't mind my saying so," George observed, tossing another handful of crumbs to the gathering pigeons. Michelle considered deflecting, but found herself answering honestly. "I am. My life has taken an unexpected turn." George nodded sagely. "Life has a way of doing that. One minute you're on a straight road, the next you're navigating hairpin turns with no guardrail." "That's exactly it," Michelle agreed, surprised by his insight. "Care to share? Sometimes talking to a stranger can help sort things out." Michelle hesitated, then gave him an abbreviated version of her situation. The unexpected pregnancy, Wesley's infidelity, the impending divorce. She omitted names and specific details, but the outline was clear enough. George listened attentively, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Reminds me of my granddaughter," he said finally. "Made a mess of her life, that girl. Drugs, bad relationships, abandoned her husband and daughter years ago." He sighed. "I've been looking for her ever since my wife passed. Promised her I'd find our Ella and bring her home." "Have you had any luck?" Michelle asked gently. George shook his head. "Lost track of her in Nevada. Then lost my house, my savings, everything, to some scammers. Been living rough ever since." He gestured vaguely at his weathered clothing. "But I keep looking. Made a promise, you see." Michelle felt a chill run through her. Nevada. An addict who abandoned her family. The parallels to Daniel's story were striking. "Your granddaughter," she said carefully. "What was her married name?" "Bennett," George replied. she married a police officer. Good man, from what I could tell during the brief time I knew him. They had a little girl. Would be about 10 now. Michelle's breath caught. George, I think I might know your granddaughter's family. The old man's eyes widened. You do? I teach music at Oak Ridge Elementary. There's a student there, Lily Bennett. Her father, Daniel, is a police detective. His wife left them years ago. He mentioned she had addiction issues. George's hands trembled as he set aside his bag of breadcrumbs. Could be a coincidence, he said, but hope had kindled in his eyes. It could, Michelle agreed. But what if it's not? Would you like me to introduce you to Daniel? He might be able to help you find your granddaughter. And either way, I think he'd want Lily to know her great-grandfather. The old man's eyes filled with tears. You would do that for me? A stranger? Michelle surprised herself by reaching out and squeezing his weathered hand. Sometimes strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. They exchanged phone numbers, and Michelle promised to speak with Daniel. As she continued her walk, Michelle reflected on the strange chain of events that had led her to this bench, to this man. Had her life not imploded? Had Wesley not betrayed her? Had she not needed time alone to think? She might never have met George Winters. Even in the midst of chaos, unexpected connections could form. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Michelle had composed herself for Wesley's visit. She wasn't naive enough to believe he simply wanted to apologize. Wesley always had an agenda. He arrived precisely on time, carrying an expensive bottle of wine before remembering her condition. Sorry, he said, setting it aside. Force of habit. Michelle led him to the dining room table, deliberately choosing not to sit in the living room where they might have been more comfortable. This was a negotiation, not a reconciliation. I've been thinking about our situation, Wesley began, his tone measured and reasonable, the same voice he used for difficult client meetings. And I believe I've found a solution that could work for everyone. Michelle raised an eyebrow but remained silent. I know I've hurt you deeply, he continued. My relationship with Camilla was a mistake, one I deeply regret. But we can't change the past. We can only decide how to move forward. And how do you propose we do that? Michelle asked. Wesley leaned forward. I think we should stay married. Of all the things Michelle had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. Excuse me? Hear me out, Wesley said quickly. Divorce is messy, expensive, and ultimately unnecessary. I'm prepared to end things with Camilla romantically, but I can't abandon her or our child. I'll provide financial support, of course, but our marriage can remain intact. Michelle stared at him, incredulous. You expect me to stay married to you while you support your mistress and illegitimate child? Wesley winced at her terminology but pressed on. Think about it practically, Michelle. Our child deserves a stable home with both parents. Financially, we're stronger together. You can continue teaching without worrying about making ends meet. I can provide for both households. And what about fidelity? Trust. The foundation of any marriage? I made a mistake, Wesley insisted. It won't happen again. I choose you, Michelle, our family. Michelle studied her husband's face, the face she'd loved and trusted for 10 years. He seemed sincere, but then he'd seemed sincere for the past year, while living a double life. Why this sudden devotion to our marriage? She asked. What's changed? Wesley hesitated, and Michelle knew instantly there was more to the story. Victor Blake knows, doesn't he? She guessed. He found out about you and his daughter. Wesley's expression confirmed her suspicion before he could speak. He was discharged from the hospital yesterday. Camilla told him everything. He was displeased. I imagine so, Michelle said dryly. Let me guess. He threatened your position at Blake Enterprises? Perhaps even your future in the industry? Victor is old-fashioned, Wesley said, not denying her assessment. He values family, stability, and appearances, Michelle added. It wouldn't look good for his company if one of his top executives was involved in a messy scandal with his daughter. Wesley had the grace to look uncomfortable. The situation is complex. Actually, it's quite simple, Michelle countered. You're not choosing me or our family. You're choosing your career, and you expect me to accept your arrangement to help you save face. That's not fair, Wesley protested. I genuinely want to make this right. By continuing to lie? By pretending we have a real marriage while you secretly support your mistress and her child? That's your solution? Wesley's facade of reasonableness began to crack. What would you have me do? Abandon Camilla? Pretend that child isn't mine? Or throw away everything I've worked for? Everything we've built together? You should have thought of those consequences before you started sleeping with your boss's daughter, Michelle said coldly. I've already contacted a divorce attorney. We meet tomorrow. Wesley's expression hardened. Don't be hasty, Michelle. Consider your options carefully. How will you support yourself and a child on a music teacher's salary? This apartment? Your health insurance? Your lifestyle? All of it depends on my income. The veiled threat wasn't lost on Michelle. Are you saying you'd fight me on alimony and child support? I'm saying that cooperation would be in everyone's best interest, Wesley replied smoothly, including our sons. Michelle felt a cold clarity settle over her. This was the real Wesley. Calculating, manipulative, always looking for leverage. Had he always been this way? Or had power and ambition changed him? Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. I think you should leave, she said quietly. Wesley stood, recognizing that he wouldn't make progress tonight. Think about my proposal, Michelle, for our son's sake, if nothing else. After he left, Michelle sat in silence, her hand resting protectively over her growing child. Wesley was right about one thing. Financially, divorce would be challenging. But staying in a marriage built on lies and manipulation would cost her something far more valuable than money, her self-respect and her peace. Tomorrow, she would meet with the divorce attorney. Tomorrow, she would begin building a new life for herself and her son. And somehow, she would find the strength to face whatever came next. Michelle stood in the doorway of Oak Ridge Elementary's music room, watching Lily Bennett rehearse her solo. The girl's clear, strong voice filled the space, bringing unexpected tears to Michelle's eyes. She blinked them away before any of the children could notice. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself, though she knew it was more than that. In the 2 weeks since confronting Wesley, Michelle had found unexpected solace in her work, in the pure, uncomplicated joy of teaching children to express themselves through music. That was beautiful, Lily, Michelle said when the girl finished. Just remember to take a deeper breath before the final phrase. Lily nodded earnestly. Like this, Ms. Harlow? She demonstrated the deeper breath. Perfect. Michelle smiled. That's all for today, everyone. Remember, the district competition is only 6 weeks away. As the children gathered their belongings and filed out, Michelle noticed Daniel waiting in the hallway. He'd been picking Lily up regularly since they'd discussed her musical future, using it as an opportunity to check on Michelle as well. Though she'd shared only the basic outlines of her marital troubles, Daniel had been a steady, unobtrusive presence in her increasingly chaotic life. Ready for your big adventure? Michelle asked Lily, nodding toward Daniel. The girl beamed. Dad's taking me to the symphony tonight. A real professional orchestra. I thought she should see what the big leagues look like, Daniel explained as they walked together toward the parking lot. Since you think she has potential. Sikis, she definitely does, Michelle confirmed. Her hand unconsciously moved to her abdomen, which had begun to show a distinct roundness. The movement didn't escape Daniel's notice. How are you feeling? He asked quietly, as Lily skipped ahead to the car. Physically, better. The morning sickness is finally easing. Michelle hesitated. Otherwise, I'm taking it day by day. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Have you thought more about what I mentioned? About George? After their chance meeting in the park, Michelle had approached Daniel about George Winters. The revelation that Lily's great-grandfather was living on the streets had shocked Daniel, who'd never met any of his ex-wife's family. Initially skeptical, he'd agreed to a carefully arranged meeting. The resemblance between Lily and George, The same unusual gray-blue eyes, the same quirk of the eyebrow when asking questions, had convinced Daniel of their relationship. "I've been looking at those assisted living options you suggested," Michelle replied. "There's one within my budget that has an opening next month." Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to handle this financially, Michelle. He's Lily's family, which makes him our responsibility." "I want to help," Michelle insisted. "After everything you've done for me, listening, supporting, that's what friends do," Daniel said simply. Friends. The word felt simultaneously comforting and oddly insufficient for the connection that had grown between them. Michelle pushed the thought aside as inappropriate. She was still technically married, still navigating the wreckage of Wesley's betrayal. "How's the divorce proceeding?" Daniel asked, as if reading her thoughts. Michelle sighed, slowly. "Wesley's being difficult. He doesn't want to let go easily." What she didn't mention was Wesley's increasingly desperate attempts to convince her to reconsider. He'd sent flowers to her classroom, left voicemails alternating between apologies and veiled threats about her financial future, and twice shown up unannounced at the apartment, forcing her to refuse to let him in. "If you need any help with protective measures," Daniel said carefully, "I can guide you through the process." "It hasn't reached that point," Michelle assured him. "He's manipulative, not violent." They reached Daniel's car, where Lily was already waiting impatiently. "Will you come to the symphony with us, Ms. Harlow?" she asked hopefully. Michelle smiled at the invitation, but shook her head. "Not tonight, sweetie. I have some work to do at home." "Another time, then," Daniel said, his tone making it clear the invitation remained open. As Michelle drove home, she reflected on how quickly her life had changed. In just over 3 weeks, she'd discovered her pregnancy, her husband's infidelity, and made the decision to rebuild her life from the ground up. She'd also found unexpected allies in Daniel, Lily, and even George Winters. Her phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. The caller ID showed her attorney's name. "Hello, Jessica," Michelle answered. "Any news?" "Actually, yes," Jessica Reynolds replied. "I just received a communication from Wesley's attorney. They're proposing a settlement offer." Michelle's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of offer?" "A surprisingly generous one, financially speaking," Jessica said cautiously. "Full ownership of the apartment, a significant lump sum payment, and monthly support for both you and the child. But there's a condition." "Of course there is," Michelle murmured. "What does he want?" "Discretion," Jessica explained. "A non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of your divorce, and specifically any knowledge you have of his relationship with Camilla Blake or her pregnancy." Michelle processed this information as she pulled into her apartment complex's parking garage. "He's still trying to keep everything quiet, to protect his image and position." "That would be my assessment," Jessica agreed. "Victor Blake is apparently very traditional in his views. He's been hospitalized again, and his condition is reportedly serious. Wesley seems desperate to maintain appearances until certain things are resolved." The implication was clear. Wesley was waiting for Victor Blake to pass away before making any public moves regarding Camilla and their child. The cynicism of this calculation turned Michelle's stomach. "I'll need to think about it," she told Jessica. "Can I let you know tomorrow?" "Of course. Take your time." As Michelle entered her apartment, her phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. "We need to talk. About Wesley. Please. Camilla Blake." Michelle stared at the message in shock. How had Camilla obtained her number? What could she possibly want to discuss? Against her better judgment, Michelle replied, "When and where?" The response came quickly. "Tomorrow, noon, the Botanical Garden Cafe. Please come alone." Michelle confirmed the meeting, curiosity overriding her reservations. As she prepared a simple dinner, her mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps Camilla wanted to apologize, or threaten her, or simply see the face of the woman Wesley had betrayed. The next morning, Michelle dressed carefully for her meeting with Camilla. She chose a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, but also clearly showed her pregnancy. No hiding what they had in common. The botanical garden was quiet on a weekday. Just a few tourists and seniors enjoying the early autumn displays. Michelle spotted Camilla immediately at an isolated table in the cafe. Without the pallor of morning sickness, Camilla Blake was strikingly beautiful. Dark hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes. Her pregnancy was more visible now, her hand resting protectively on her rounded abdomen, just as Michelle's often did. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said, as Michelle sat across from her. Her voice was soft, cultured, with a slight tremor of nervousness. "I was curious," Michelle admitted. "What could we possibly have to say to each other?" Camilla took a deep breath. "I wanted to see you, to apologize, though I know that's inadequate, and to warn you." "Warn me?" Michelle repeated, surprised. "About Wesley?" Camilla glanced around, ensuring no one could overhear them. "He's not who you think he is, who I thought he was." Michelle studied the younger woman carefully. "I think I'm beginning to understand exactly who Wesley is. But please, elaborate." Camilla's perfectly manicured hands fidgeted with her water glass. "When we began our relationship, Wesley told me he was separated from his wife, that the marriage was over in all but paperwork, that you had both accepted it and were moving on amicably." "A convenient fiction," Michelle noted, keeping her voice neutral. "Yes?" Camilla looked genuinely distressed. "When I discovered I was pregnant, he seemed surprised but supportive. He promised we would be a family, that once certain business matters were settled with my father, he would finalize his divorce and we could be together openly." "And you believed him?" Michelle said, not unkindly. Camilla nodded, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I did, until my father returned from the hospital, and I finally told him everything. He was furious, of course, but more importantly, he revealed things about Wesley that I never knew." Michelle leaned forward slightly. "What things?" "Financial improprieties, unauthorized contracts, manipulated reports." Camilla lowered her voice further. "While my father was hospitalized, Wesley made several major decisions that benefited him personally, but put the company at risk. Dad's been investigating quietly since he returned." "I see," Michelle said, though the implications were still coming into focus. "And how does this concern me?" "Wesley's desperate," Camilla explained. "My father has essentially frozen him out of real authority, but is keeping him on a tight leash while gathering evidence. Wesley knows it's only a matter of time before he faces serious consequences." She hesitated. "He's been moving assets, preparing contingencies." The warning became clear. "You think he's hiding money that should be part of our divorce settlement?" Camilla nodded. "Among other things, I believe he's planning something drastic. When confronted by my father, he seemed different, cold, calculating, almost threatening." "Why are you telling me this?" Michelle asked, genuinely curious. "We're hardly allies, Ms. Blake." "Camilla, please." She met Michelle's gaze directly. "Because despite everything, I believe you deserve the truth. And because," her hand moved again to her stomach, "our children are siblings. Whatever happens between us, between any of us adults, that fact remains." Michelle felt an unexpected surge of empathy for the younger woman. Camilla had been manipulated by Wesley just as she had. Differently, perhaps, but with the same callous disregard for the consequences. "Thank you for the warning," Michelle said. "I'll speak to my attorney." Camilla reached into her designer handbag and extracted a USB drive. "This contains copies of documents my father's security team found. Financial records, offshore accounts. Use it if you need to." Michelle took the drive, surprised by Camilla's directness. "Won't your father object to you sharing this?" "What Wesley did to the company was wrong," Camilla said firmly. "What he did to us was wrong too. My father understands that now." As they prepared to leave, Michelle found herself asking the question that had been nagging at her. "Are you keeping the baby? Your daughter?" Camilla's expression softened. Yes, whatever Wesley's faults, this child is innocent. She deserves to be loved, to be protected. On that, we agree completely, Michelle said, unconsciously mirroring Camilla's protective gesture. They parted with an awkward but genuine handshake, two women connected by circumstance and betrayal, each carrying a piece of a shared, complicated future. That evening, Michelle met with Jessica Reynolds to review the USB drive's contents. The attorney's expression grew increasingly grim as she examined the documents. "This is substantial," Jessica said finally. "Wesley has been moving money to offshore accounts, underreporting income, possibly even committing fraud. We can use this to ensure you receive a fair settlement, but what?" Michelle prompted. "But it could also lead to criminal charges against him," Jessica finished. "Are you prepared for that possibility? It would mean publicity, possibly a trial. Everything you might want to keep private could become public record." Michelle considered this carefully. "I don't want revenge. I just want what's fair for me and my son. Can we use this as leverage, without necessarily exposing everything?" Jessica nodded slowly. "We can approach his attorney privately first, make it clear what we have and what we're seeking. Most people in Wesley's position would rather settle generously than risk criminal charges." "Then that's what we'll do," Michelle decided. Later that night, as Michelle prepared for bed, her phone rang. Wesley's name flashed on the screen. She nearly declined the call, but decided to answer. "Michelle." Wesley's voice sounded strained, desperate. "We need to talk immediately. Things have changed." "I'm aware," Michelle said calmly. "Camilla and I had an interesting conversation today." Silence stretched over the line. Then, "What did she tell you?" "Enough," Michelle replied. "My attorney has the financial documents, Wesley. All of them." Another long pause. "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can," Michelle said. "But save it for your attorney. Mine will be contacting them tomorrow with our adjusted settlement terms." "Michelle, please." Wesley's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," she countered. "You've been stealing from Blake Enterprises while sleeping with the owner's daughter. Now you're trying to hide assets from our divorce settlement. What am I missing?" "It's more complicated than that," Wesley insisted. "Victor Blake isn't the upstanding businessman everyone thinks. Some of those unauthorized transactions were covering up his own financial misdeeds. He's using me as a scapegoat." Michelle felt a headache building behind her eyes. More lies? Or partial truths? With Wesley, it was impossible to know any more. "Whatever the case," she said firmly, "I'm not involved in your business dealings. I just want a fair divorce settlement and to move on with my life." "I'll give you anything you want," Wesley promised quickly. "The apartment, money, support, whatever you need. Just don't submit those documents." The desperation in his voice confirmed what Michelle had suspected. These records could truly destroy him, professionally and possibly legally. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But I won't be manipulated or threatened anymore, Wesley. Those days are over." After ending the call, Michelle sat in the darkness of her bedroom, considering her options. Use the documents as leverage for a better settlement? Turn everything over to the authorities? Simply walk away with whatever Wesley offered to keep things quiet? The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of what truly mattered. Whatever she decided, Michelle needed to prioritize her child's future and her own peace of mind. Revenge might be satisfying in the moment, but she didn't want bitterness to define her new beginning. The next morning, Michelle woke to breaking news. Victor Blake had suffered another heart attack overnight. His condition was critical. The business world was holding its collective breath, waiting to see who would take control of Blake Enterprises if the worst happened. Michelle's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Saw the news about Blake. Are you okay?" His concern touched her. "I'm fine," she responded, "but things might get complicated. Coffee after school?" "Absolutely," came his immediate reply. Throughout her classes that day, Michelle felt a strange sense of foreboding. The power vacuum at Blake Enterprises would create new dynamics, new pressures. How would this affect Wesley? Camilla? The divorce proceedings? She tried to focus on her students, on Lily's solo preparation, but her mind kept returning to the tangled web of lies and manipulation surrounding her husband's professional life. After the final bell, Daniel met her in the music room. "You look worried," he said, without preamble. Michelle nodded, quickly explaining what she'd learned from Camilla and the potential implications of Victor Blake's critical condition. Daniel listened intently, his detective's mind clearly processing the information from multiple angles. "This goes beyond a simple divorce," he said finally. "If what Camilla shared is accurate, there could be serious financial crimes involved." "I know," Michelle sighed. "I just wanted a clean break, not to be pulled into some corporate scandal." "Have you decided what to do with the information?" Michelle shook her head. "Not yet. Part of me wants to use it as leverage to secure our future. Another part wants to turn everything over to the proper authorities and walk away completely." She met Daniel's steady gaze. "What would you do?" He considered the question carefully. "Professionally, I'd say report it. These kinds of financial crimes hurt real people, employees, shareholders, potentially even customers. And personally?" Daniel's expression softened. "Personally, I'd understand wanting to protect yourself and your child from unnecessary drama and publicity." "There's no simple answer here, Michelle." She appreciated his honesty, his refusal to offer easy platitudes. "I have until tomorrow to decide. My attorney is meeting with Wesley's team then." As Daniel drove her home, they discussed lighter topics. Lily's progress with her solo, plans for moving George Winters into assisted living the following week, the upcoming school fall festival. The normalcy of these conversations felt like a lifeline amid the chaos of Michelle's personal life. "Thank you," she said, as they pulled up to her apartment complex. "For listening, for not judging, for being a friend when I needed one most." Daniel turned to face her, his expression earnest. "That's not something you need to thank me for, Michelle. It's just who we are to each other now." The simple statement held layers of meaning that neither was ready to fully articulate. Michelle nodded, understanding what remained unspoken between them. As she entered her apartment, Michelle's resolve crystallized. She would use the financial information as leverage for a fair settlement, but wouldn't pursue criminal charges unless Wesley forced her hand. She wanted closure, not retribution. She wanted peace for herself and her son. Her phone rang. Jessica Reynolds calling with urgent news. "Victor Blake died 30 minutes ago," the attorney said without preamble. "Heart failure. It's not public yet, but my sources at the hospital confirmed it." Michelle sank onto the couch, absorbing this development. "How does this change things for us?" "Potentially significantly," Jessica replied. "Ownership and control of Blake Enterprises will likely pass to Camilla as the sole heir. Wesley's position becomes much more precarious, or potentially more secure, depending on his relationship with Camilla now." Before Michelle could respond, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Wesley standing in the hallway, looking disheveled and agitated. "My husband is here," Michelle told Jessica. "I'll call you back." "Do you want me to stay on the line?" the attorney asked, concern evident in her voice. "No, it's all right," Michelle assured her. "I'll be fine." She ended the call and opened the door, maintaining the security chain. "What do you want, Wesley?" "I need to talk to you," he said urgently. "Victor Blake is dead." "I just heard," Michelle replied. "That doesn't explain why you're here." "Everything's changed now," Wesley insisted. "Please, just 5 minutes." Against her better judgment, Michelle removed the chain and allowed him inside. Wesley paced the living room, running his hands through his hair, that familiar gesture of distress that once would have moved her to comfort him. "Victor's death changes everything," Wesley repeated. "Camilla will inherit controlling interest in the company. We need to move quickly." "We?" Michelle raised an eyebrow. "There is no we anymore, Wesley. Not in that sense." "You don't understand," he said, lowering his voice. "This is our chance. All of us. I've been protecting Camilla, shielding her from her father's more questionable business practices. Now she needs me more than ever." Michelle crossed her arms. "And where exactly do I fit into this scenario? If we present a united front, if we show that we're working through our issues as a family, it strengthens my position as Camilla's advisor and protector. The board respects stability, continuity." The audacity of his proposal left Michelle momentarily speechless. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said finally. "I will not participate in any deception to help salvage your career or your relationship with Camilla. Our marriage is over." Wesley's expression hardened. "Then I hope you're prepared for a long, expensive public divorce, because without my position at Blake Enterprises, I'll have no choice but to fight for every penny." "Is that a threat?" Michelle asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's reality," Wesley countered. "You have documents that could damage me. I have resources to drag this out for years. Or we could find a mutually beneficial arrangement." Michelle studied the man before her, the man she had loved and trusted for a decade. In his desperation, he had finally revealed himself completely. There was no love here, no genuine remorse, only calculation and self-interest. "I think you should leave," she said quietly. "Michelle." "Now, Wesley, before I call Daniel Bennett and ask him to escort you out." At the mention of Daniel's name, something dark flashed in Wesley's eyes. "The cop again. You two seem awfully close these days." "That's none of your concern," Michelle replied. "Please leave." After Wesley departed, Michelle stood in the center of her living room, feeling oddly calm. The decision she'd been struggling with had suddenly become crystal clear. She wouldn't use the documents as leverage or turn them over to authorities. She would simply give Wesley what he claimed to want, a quick, quiet divorce. But on her terms, not his. She called Jessica immediately. "I've made my decision," she told her attorney. "I want to offer Wesley a deal. I'll sign an NDA about his relationship with Camilla and return all copies of the financial documents, but only after he agrees to my full settlement terms. No negotiations, no delays." "That's generous of you," Jessica observed. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain I want this chapter of my life closed," Michelle said firmly, "and I want to move forward without bitterness or vengeance weighing me down." As she ended the call, Michelle placed her hands on her growing abdomen, feeling her son move within her. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Better than okay. We're going to build something new." Outside, the first leaves of autumn were beginning to fall, golden in the evening light. Michelle watched them drift to the ground, thinking about seasons changing, endings becoming beginnings, and the strange, winding path that had led her here, to this moment of clarity and unexpected hope. Winter had descended on Connecticut, draping the world in crystalline white. Michelle stood by the window of her music classroom, watching snowflakes drift lazily from a pearl-gray sky as her students rehearsed their final number for the holiday concert. Their voices blended in perfect harmony, filling the room with warmth despite the December chill. Her hand rested on her now prominent baby bump as she swayed gently to the music, just 4 weeks away from her due date. The last 3 months had brought more changes than Michelle could have imagined. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency. Wesley had accepted her terms without resistance, eager to put the matter behind him and focus on salvaging his position at Blake Enterprises under Camilla's new leadership. Michelle had kept her word, returning all copies of the incriminating financial documents and signing the non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, she received full ownership of their apartment, a generous settlement, and guaranteed child support. It wasn't about the money. It was about freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from lies, from the shadow of Wesley's betrayal. Michelle had emerged from the ordeal not broken, but transformed. "That was beautiful, everyone," she called as the students finished their song. "Remember, the concert is tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock sharp. Wear your red and green outfits, and be here by 6:30 for warm-up." As the children filed out, Michelle noticed Lily lingering behind, organizing sheet music with unusual meticulousness. "Everything okay, Lily?" Michelle asked, approaching the girl. Lily looked up, her gray-blue eyes, so like her great-grandfather's, wide with excitement and nervousness. "Do you think I'll do okay on the solo, Ms. Harlow? What if I mess up?" Michelle knelt carefully beside Lily's chair. No small feat in her 8th month of pregnancy. "You've practiced more than anyone. You know this music inside and out. But even if something unexpected happens, you'll handle it beautifully, because that's what performers do." "Like you did when you played violin?" Lily asked. Michelle smiled. Over the past months, she'd shared stories of her time in the orchestra with Lily, using her own experiences to guide the young musician. "Exactly like that," Michelle confirmed. "One time, right in the middle of a concert, my E string snapped. Know what I did?" Lily shook her head, enthralled. "I kept playing on 3 strings, adjusting as I went. No one in the audience even noticed." Michelle gave Lily's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We adapt, we overcome, we keep making music. That's what artists do." Lily nodded solemnly. "Dad says that's what life is like too. We just keep going, even when things break." The wisdom in the child's words touched Michelle deeply. "Your dad is a very smart man." As if summoned by their conversation, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Sorry I'm late," he called. "Got held up at the station." Michelle straightened carefully, one hand supporting her lower back. The baby had been particularly active today, as if practicing soccer moves against her ribs. "No problem," she replied. "Lily and I were just having an artist-to-artist chat." Daniel's smile as he looked at his daughter was full of pride. "My little maestro," he said affectionately. Then, turning to Michelle, "Still on for dinner tonight. George is looking forward to it. He's been practicing that new recipe all afternoon." The mention of George Winters brought a smile to Michelle's face. The elderly man had flourished in the past months, moving from homelessness to a small but comfortable apartment in the senior living community just 3 blocks from Daniel's house. Though the search for his granddaughter Ella continued, the connection he'd formed with Lily had given him new purpose. His weekly family dinners had become the highlight of Michelle's weeks. "Wouldn't miss it," Michelle assured him. "I've been craving his apple cobbler all day. I helped him make it yesterday," Lily announced proudly. "We added extra cinnamon, just how you like it." As they walked together to the parking lot, the easy conversation flowing between them felt like the most natural thing in the world. What had begun as an unexpected connection during Michelle's darkest days had evolved into something precious and sustaining. Daniel's steady presence, his integrity, his devotion to Lily, all of it stood in such stark contrast to Wesley's duplicity. Their relationship had developed slowly, respectfully, both aware of the complicated circumstances. They had become friends first, then confidants, then something more. Daniel had never pushed, never presumed, allowing Michelle the space and time to heal from her marriage's painful end. "How's the nursery coming along?" Daniel asked as they reached their cars. "Almost finished," Michelle replied. "The crib and changing table are set up. Just waiting on the rocking chair to be delivered. Do you need help with anything else?" His question was casual but sincere. Michelle thought for a moment. "Actually, if you have time this weekend, I could use some help hanging the mobile and a few pictures." "Consider it done," Daniel said with a smile. "I'll bring my toolbox." After confirming the dinner time, they parted ways. Michelle drove home through the gently falling snow, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed since that fateful day at the ultrasound clinic. What had seemed like the end of her world had ultimately led her here, to new beginnings, to unexpected joy. Her phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Camilla Blake's name appeared on the display. Michelle answered, no longer surprised by the occasional communication between them. Their unusual connection had evolved into a cautious but sincere mutual respect. "Michelle," Camilla greeted her. "How are you feeling?" "Like a whale," Michelle replied honestly. "But otherwise, good. And you?" "You must be due any day now." "Next week, officially," Camilla confirmed. though the doctor thinks she might arrive sooner. That's actually why I'm calling." Michelle detected a note of tension in the younger woman's voice. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, but—" Camilla hesitated. "Wesley's been acting strangely. More controlling, more insistent about being involved. He's talking about custody arrangements already, making demands about the baby's name, education, everything." "That sounds like Wesley," Michelle observed, remembering his need to control every situation, to shape circumstances to his advantage. "He's changed since taking over as COO," Camilla continued. "Colder, more calculated. My father's attorney found some additional irregularities in the company accounts, things even I didn't know about." Michelle felt a pang of concern for the younger woman. Despite their complicated history, she didn't wish Wesley's manipulations on anyone. "What can I do to help?" "I've been thinking about the children," Camilla said. "Our children. Half-siblings who deserve to know each other, regardless of the circumstances of their conception." The suggestion took Michelle by surprise, though she had considered the possibility herself. "You want them to have a relationship? When they're older, yes. If you're amenable," Camilla replied. "They shouldn't suffer for their father's mistakes." Michelle thought of her own childhood, of the mysteries and gaps in her family history, of George Winters, searching for his granddaughter for years, desperate to maintain that familial connection, despite everything. "I agree," Michelle said finally. "When the time is right, we can find a way to introduce them." The relief in Camilla's voice was palpable. "Thank you. I was afraid you'd refuse." "The past is the past," Michelle said. "We're both moving forward now." After ending the call, Michelle arrived home to find a package waiting at her door, a gift from her colleagues at school. A beautiful handmade baby blanket with musical notes embroidered along the border. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to her eyes. Throughout this ordeal, she had discovered just how many people truly cared for her. Not just Daniel and Lily, but her fellow teachers, her students' parents, even the attorney who had guided her through the divorce. That evening at George's apartment, surrounded by the warmth of good food and better company, Michelle felt a profound sense of gratitude. George had prepared a feast, his gnarled hands still skilled from decades of cooking for his family. Lily chattered excitedly about the upcoming concert, while Daniel shared amusing stories from his day at the station. This wasn't the family Michelle had envisioned for herself a year ago, but it was no less real, no less precious for being unexpected. After dinner, as Lily helped George with the dishes, Daniel and Michelle sat on the small balcony, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill, watching the snow continue to fall over the city. "I got a lead on Ella," Daniel said quietly. A woman matching her description was admitted to a rehabilitation center in Reno last month. Michelle turned to him, hope rising in her chest. "Have you told George?" Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. I want to be certain before I get his hopes up. I've seen too many false leads break his heart." "If it is her," Michelle said thoughtfully, "do you think she'd want to see Lily? To meet her father again?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "Addiction changes people. The Ella I knew, the woman who left us, she wasn't capable of being a mother then. Maybe she never will be. But for George's sake, for Lily's sake, I hope she's found some peace." Michelle reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Whatever happens, they have us. We're here." Daniel's eyes met hers, warm and steady in the dim light. "We are." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, making Michelle gasp. "Someone agrees," Daniel chuckled, his hand hovering near her abdomen. "May I?" Michelle nodded, guiding his hand to the spot where her son was performing his acrobatics. Daniel's expression of wonder as he felt the movement brought a lump to Michelle's throat. "He's strong," Daniel observed. "Like his mother," Michelle replied with a smile. 2 weeks later, on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Michelle went into labor. The timing seemed fitting somehow. Darkness giving way to light, endings becoming beginnings. Daniel drove her to the hospital while Lily stayed with George. Both of them promised updates throughout the process. The labor was long but uncomplicated. At 3:17 in the morning, as the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, James George Harlow entered the world with a powerful cry. His tiny fists clenched, as if ready to take on whatever life might bring. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, standing beside Michelle's bed as she held her son for the first time. "He is," she agreed, tears of joy streaming down her face. James had a dusting of auburn hair, just like hers, and when he briefly opened his eyes, she caught a glimpse of deep blue, though she knew that might change in the coming months. 2 days later, as Michelle was preparing to take James home, she received a text from Camilla. "Sophia Elizabeth Blake arrived last night. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Mother and daughter doing well." Michelle sent her congratulations, along with a photo of James. 2 babies, born just days apart, connected by blood, if not by circumstance. Michelle hoped that someday, when they were old enough to understand, James and Sophia might forge their own relationship, untainted by the complexities of their parents' history. The first weeks of motherhood passed in a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and moments of transcendent joy. Daniel and Lily visited often, bringing meals, offering help, or simply providing company. George knitted James a tiny hat and booties, his arthritic fingers painstakingly crafting each stitch with love. On a crisp January morning, as Michelle sat in the nursery's newly delivered rocking chair, feeding James while soft music played in the background, her phone rang. It was Daniel, his voice tense with emotion. "We found her," he said without preamble. "Ella. It's definitely her this time." Michelle held her breath. "How is she?" "Sober. 6 months now," Daniel replied. "She's completed the rehabilitation program and is staying in a halfway house. She wants to see George." "And Lily?" Michelle asked, the protective instinct she felt toward the child almost as strong as what she felt for her own son. Daniel sighed. "She asked about her, seemed genuinely remorseful about leaving, but I told her we'd need to take things very slowly where Lily is concerned." "Of course," Michelle agreed. "How's George taking the news?" "He's overwhelmed. Crying 1 minute, laughing the next. We're driving out to Reno next weekend if his doctor clears him for travel." Michelle adjusted James to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Would you like me to come? For support?" "Actually," Daniel said, his voice softening, "that's exactly what I was calling to ask. I know it's a lot with a newborn, but having you there would mean everything to both of us." "Then we'll be there," Michelle promised. "James and I both." The following weekend found them on a plane to Reno, James sleeping peacefully against Michelle's chest in a baby carrier. George sat beside her, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held the photo of his granddaughter, the same photo he'd carried through years of homelessness and heartbreak. "What if she doesn't want to see me?" he whispered to Michelle, vulnerability etched into every line of his face. "What if she blames me for not finding her sooner?" Michelle covered his hand with hers. "She asked for you, George. She wants this reunion as much as you do." The meeting took place in a small garden behind the halfway house, neutral ground where Ella felt secure. When George first saw his granddaughter, he stopped in his tracks, tears streaming down his face. Ella, thin but healthy-looking, her red hair faded but still recognizable, approached cautiously, her own eyes brimming. "Grandpa," she said, her voice small and uncertain. George opened his arms, and Ella fell into them, decades of separation dissolving in that embrace. "My Zena," he murmured, using his pet name for her. "My little Zena, I found you." Michelle, Daniel, and Lily gave them privacy for their reunion, waiting nearby with baby James. When Ella eventually approached them, her gaze fell immediately on Lily. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. The same unusual eyes, the same arch of the eyebrow. "She has your mother's smile," George told Ella gently. Ella nodded, not attempting to touch Lily, respecting the boundaries Daniel had established. "Hello, Lily," she said simply. I'm your mom, but I know I haven't earned that title yet." Lily studied the woman carefully before responding. "Ms. Harlow says earning trust is like learning an instrument. It takes practice and patience." A small, genuine smile appeared on Ella's face. "She sounds very wise, your Ms. Harlow." "She is," Lily confirmed. "She's going to marry my dad someday. They don't know it yet, but I do." Daniel coughed in embarrassment while Michelle felt heat rise to her cheeks. Ella laughed, a clear, bright sound that revealed glimpses of who she had been before addiction claimed her. "Kids," she said, shaking her head. "They see everything, don't they?" The day ended with tentative plans for future visits, for gradual reintegration. Ella would remain in Reno, continuing her recovery program, while George would return to Connecticut with them. But the connection had been re-established, the foundation laid for whatever might come next. On the flight home, as James slept in the travel bassinet and Lily and George dozed in the seats across the aisle, Daniel turned to Michelle. "About what Lily said earlier," he began, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Michelle smiled. "Children do have remarkable insight sometimes." "They do," Daniel agreed. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Michelle, I know this might seem rushed or complicated, given everything you've been through, but these past months have shown me that sometimes life's greatest gifts come from its most unexpected turns." Michelle's heart quickened. "Daniel, I'm not proposing," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. That would be premature. But I want you to know that I'm here, not just as a friend or a support system, but as a man who has grown to love you. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." Michelle looked at their intertwined fingers, then at James, sleeping peacefully, then at Lily and George across the aisle. None of this was what she had planned or expected when she discovered her pregnancy nearly 9 months ago. Yet somehow, it felt right. It felt like home. "I think," she said carefully, "that I might be closer to ready than either of us realized." Daniel's smile lit his entire face. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Michelle confirmed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Life keeps teaching me that the most beautiful beginnings often come disguised as endings." 6 months later, on a perfect summer evening, Michelle stood in the garden behind Daniel's house. Now, their house. James, round-cheeked and curious at 7 months old, sat on George's lap, batting at the colorful ribbons decorating the chairs. Lily, radiant in her role as flower girl, adjusted the small wreath of wildflowers in her hair. In the front row, Ella sat beside her father, 6 days into a weekend visit, her third since their reunion. Her recovery continued, one day at a time, but the fractured family was slowly healing. To everyone's surprise, Camilla Blake sat in the second row, holding baby Sophia, who gurgled happily at the festivities. Wesley had not been invited, but had reluctantly agreed to Camilla's attendance with their daughter. The first tentative steps toward the relationship Michelle hoped the half-siblings might someday share. As the simple ceremony began, Michelle walked down the makeshift aisle alone, a deliberate choice symbolizing that she came to this union whole, on her own terms. Daniel waited beneath an arch of summer roses, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. Their vows were straightforward, but profound, acknowledging the unexpected path that had brought them together, and the choice they were making to walk forward side by side. When they were pronounced husband and wife, when Daniel kissed her with tender reverence, Michelle felt a circle completing, not the circle she had once envisioned, but one infinitely more precious for having been forged through adversity and discovery. At the reception, as twilight deepened into night and stars appeared overhead, Daniel pulled Michelle close for their first dance. James watched from Lily's arms, his tiny hands clapping in delight at the music. "Are you happy?" Daniel murmured against Michelle's hair. Michelle thought of the day that had changed everything, that moment in the ultrasound waiting room when she had given up her seat to a pale, distressed woman. The small act of kindness that had revealed a painful truth and ultimately set her on a path to authentic joy. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Michelle and Daniel stood on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. Michelle thought about the journey that had brought her here, from devastation to reconstruction, from betrayal to trust, from endings to beginnings. She thought of James and Sophia, half-siblings who would grow up knowing each other despite the complicated circumstances of their conception. She thought of Lily, blossoming under the combined nurturing of her father, Michelle, and now, cautiously, her recovering mother. She thought of George, who had never given up searching for his family, whose persistence had ultimately led to healing across generations. And she thought of herself, the woman who had once believed her greatest dream impossible, who had discovered her strength in her darkest hour, who had found the courage to release bitterness and embrace possibility. The woman who now stood beside the man who loved her, not despite her complexities, but because of them. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his arm warm around her waist. Michelle leaned into him, content in a way she had never thought possible on that life-changing day when she had offered her seat to a stranger. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most difficult moments of our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be," she replied. "And I wouldn't change a single step of the journey that brought us here." Above them, the summer stars continued their eternal dance, bearing witness to this moment of completion and beginning, to the beautiful truth that even in our most broken moments, healing and love remain possible. All we need is the courage to recognize them when they appear, sometimes in the most unexpected places, sometimes in the simple act of offering a seat to someone in need. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.